Welcome to Book Club for Movies, everybody, for the week of July 5th. I'm Ryan Miller, and it's trademark Perfect Weapon himself, Matt Amberg.
The perfect wang pen.
And we're Book Club. I don't know why I started that. We're not, I guess it could happen, but
I don't know why you started any of this.
on Book Club for Movies.
I question your motives on a regular basis.
We're Book Club on Book Club for Movies. We're Book Club for Movies, where we watch one movie a week and invite you to do the same so you can talk about it with us. Just send it on in to podcast@bookclubformovies.com or Facebook and Twitter, and we'll talk about it on the show.
And Letterboxd.
Oh, yeah. No, you're right.
You got to add that into your Facebook and Twitter now. I've
done a fair amount of work on that this week, too. I'm trying to... So the new workflow is do the show and then go through my notes and delete my notes as I do a Letterboxd entry. So as you might imagine, I'm barely through any of the Godzilla movies.
That is so... But that's cool and smart and fun.
Yeah. Time will tell.
I've told you, and I am time.
On Book Club for Movies. So this week we are doing... Oh boy. Okay. Yeah. Before I even get started on getting started, Matt, do you have a synopsis for this week's movie, The Perfect Weapon, from 1991 and from no other year wherein they made a film of the same name?
Which apparently happened a lot over the past forever. Yeah, 1991's movie, The Perfect Weapon, the synopsis may go a little something like this. The Perfect Weapon, coming at you an hour and 23 minutes, written by David C. Wilson, directed by Mark DeSalle, starring Jeff Speakman, John Dye, Mako, James Hong, Dante Basco, Seth Sakai, and Professor Toru Tanaka. Here is your Book Club for Movies synopsis for The Perfect Weapon. When a Kenpo master's old family friend is murdered, only Jeffrey Speakman and his trusty sidekick Rufio are equipped to right this egregious wrong.
Thank you. That takes care of half my notes, actually, right there.
Boom! Getting it out there. Okay.
If you listened last week...
I listened.
I'm glad. Because Matt very graciously gave me the entire month of July, it seems, to do what we typically do for the Wieners. It's the month of Wiener. And we get to do all action movies for the entire month of July. I've been making my way through this embarrassingly incomplete list that is now on Letterboxd, that you can kind of follow the evolution of the genre in a way. I've been taking cues from the Art of Action, Scott Adkins' YouTube series, and a couple documentaries, Kung Fu Kicks and Iron Fists. It might be the other way around. And In Search of the Last Action Hero, both which are slightly different in their approach to history, but will give you a good idea of what to expect, I think, from the genre on the whole.
On the whole.
And I knew it. Gold member does not show up anywhere on that list. Is that where?
It's one of them. I don't remember which one that is.
So... we're going a little bit out of order, quite possibly perfectly still. We decided to start with The Perfect Weapon, this 1991 feature. But to kind of place it into history, I've gone as far back as the Wuxia epics, which King Hu has been my latest kind of that I've been working my way through. And I think I'm on the last one before I get to the new. And I tried to mention the director last week, and I think I did a poor job, but the guy that did 36 Chamber and Dirty Ho and all that. So I'm about to switch directors on the journey, but I'm still within kind of that 1970s Chinese Kung Fu segment.
Yeah.
That hits a sea change around the Jackie Chan era, which I've already said that Drunken Master is one of my favorites of all time, the 78.
Yeah.
But I've never watched it in context, which is kind of the point of this. That's why I'm going through chronologically, except for today. But I'm excited now to watch that and kind of see what Jackie Chan did in the midst of all these still very good, but very different. You know, I've never seen even what I have seen of the, I've got to look up the director now before I keep mentioning him. Liu. Okay. Liu. So if I'm saying that wrong, that's how it's spelled. But even of that stuff I've seen, none of it really approaches the Jackie Chan stuff. So I'm very anxious to see where that goes.
Yeah.
I feel like this is already turning into one of my classic overly long introductions that has nothing to do with the movie we're watching. But this is to say we're coming in at 1991, where the action, or even just the I'm thinking Hong Kong action, has been adopted several times over, I feel like, by the States. But we are well into, even by 91, it being adopted and recycled and Americanized, 50 times over, even at this point. And there's still lots of history left, But the reason why we're starting here, I feel like, is because it does give us a good entry point, both as, might I say, Speakman-esque folks that we are. It's where we come from. It's kind of what we're familiar with, and it's certainly in our wheelhouse. This kind of late 80s, 90s action, not comedy, technically.
It is technically not.
So that by no means exhausts all of the needless information I am going to throw at you. And for anybody that is interested in it, a lot of it does come from the Art of Action episode for Jeff Speakman on Scott Adkins' YouTube. Because, as you might imagine, there's not a ton of written stuff out there about 1991's The Perfect Weapon.
Which is a crime.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. I don't know whether or not it's interesting, in the context of everything I just mentioned, or just straight up interesting. You decide. But if you are interested in anything I do end up saying, just go watch that episode, because I'm going to steal a lot from it. And honestly, it's one of the better ones for sure. He seems like a super cool dude, and it's fun to hear him talk about his adventurous trip through Hollywood, through the Hollywood system.
Hey, speaking of Scott Adkins, did you see that he's going to be in John Wick?
Oh, I think you told me that. Didn't I?
He's in John
Wick. You
Wick.
keep throwing this person's going to be. Oh, Donnie Yen was the one you told me too. That's going to be in the next John Wick or something. Yeah.
And I think and all of them are also in the Matrix with him. I feel like now that the John Wick.
Oh, really?
I don't know, but I feel like that's what's happening. I feel like the Matrix and John Wick are going to become one universe.
They could. It's not even unsurprising.
John Wick in the ultimate finale, he is just going to go no, and then stop being shot at.
I mean, he has all but done that in every John Wick, but certainly the last.
His dog is going to rematerialize in his hand along with his wife, and he's going to go, game over.
Wait, he's going to start stealing Bill Paxton lines?
And
Wait, is that?
And then he's going to teleport away.
Okay.
I don't know.
It's all right. So
his wife wasn't killed. She was taken out of the Matrix. She's in the real world now, and that's what John Wick doesn't know. And John Wick is a clone of he's a clone of Neo that doesn't know he's a clone. See, this is a real movie.
That's my fault. I'm a bad partner for just letting you twist in the wind there, but I was honestly really interested to see where that was going to go.
I mean, I was kind of curious where I was headed to.
Okay, all right. So to keep it all on The Perfect Weapon from here on out. That's not a shot at you. I'm sorry. No, that's not a shot at you. I just mean to say, after all of the hey, everything you've just said is not that far removed from all of the useless information that I spat out 2 seconds ago. So to say that the useless information from here on out is going to directly relate to The Perfect Weapon, there you go. But I also think it's because the movie itself, if you haven't figured it out by now, isn't going to be that much of a deep movie. I actually enjoyed it. I think it was a bunch of fun.
I completely agree. It is a silly action movie that I in comparison to the last couple of films, definitely earns its runtime.
Does it even break the 90-minute mark?
It's an hour and 23 minutes, I think.
There you go. Yeah. Okay. So, and that's to say, I wouldn't even put this in the category that we've mentioned numerous times, where we kind of miss the VHS rack, where we could just pick up stuff based on cover alone and it was good enough. I think we had this discussion around Boss Level and probably the episode before it.
Sure.
I would say this is still a cut above that, and certainly the execs that put it into motion thought so, which is part of the reason also I think I want to talk about the history of the thing. Have you watched the Jeff Speakman episode of Art of Action?
No.
Awesome. So I know all of this stuff, and I'm going to tell you it's...
I feel like you're threatening me right now.
It is actually pretty unique in that it's the only. Okay, I'm sure there are other, and especially when it gets to cinematic martial arts, there's lots of borrowing and for many, especially the most popular films, there's lots of there's lots of mixing of the martial arts, you could say, especially as mixed martial arts has taken over much of the art form. But this one is very specifically a Kenpo karate movie,
right?
Which I always thought was, karate Japan, but I guess according to Speakman, this thing started out in China, which I feel like I keep hearing the more I not to say that every country doesn't have their own, and certainly own their own. Yeah, okay. You're giving me a funny look like, keep it going, you racist weirdo.
Yeah, you're making it weirder than it needs to be.
Okay. This is good. I tend to go 2-3 parentheticals deep. You can cut me off at like 2 max, let's say.
I will try.
Okay.
Because sometimes I get dragged into the parentheticals and then I'm adding into it. It's an art. It's a perfect weapon. The parenthetical.
So Kenpo, while it does have that beginning, became Americanized, it seems. And a lot of this is going from Jeff Speakman, so I'm sure there's an amount of, not embellishment, but it depends on who you ask type thing, But apparently it was Americanized by Ed Parker, who was straight up Jeff Speakman's teacher.
Right.
So when Kenpo came to the States, apparently Parker was the guy that introduced kind of a science, or which almost the way he says it sounds a bit demeaning, because if coming from Eastern philosophy, it's not like some of this wasn't, especially over, millennia, it seems like, but at least hundreds of years, this wasn't itself, part of it. But Ed Parker is known for supposedly introducing this kind of science of impact and cause and effect into the art of Kenpo. So Jeff Speakman, who, like many others in his day, decided that he liked karate. This is 91, or actually no, I guess this would have been still in the 80s, which is even more appropriate. This is just what it was like in the 80s. Like most people walking around,
just Cobra Kai
knew karate. Yeah.
Just people knew it. In California, especially, you had to be careful, man. You walk down the street and then suddenly that dude's a surfer. Wait, what? What's he doing? Yeah, he's sailing through the air, kicking your face off.
That's why you stay out of Reseda. You're not even that far from joking. Like, seriously, The Karate Kid was the most mainstream hit you could get, and karate just straight up was everywhere. Not in kind of the way I'm joking, but certainly it probably led to Jeff Speakman himself taking classes or running into somebody, like he said, that took classes. And in his words, the first class he took, he knew he was going to be doing it for the rest of his life. So eventually he makes his way to Ed Parker's dojo, which is in LA, which means, of course, somebody in that class at some point hands him a card. Actually, I want to say he went with Ed Parker and then he was actually teaching his own classes. And then somebody came up with their card and was like, hey, I make movies. You should be in a movie. And he was like, okay. And then she came back again, and said, no, really, here's the card. And I think she gave him the number to an acting studio or something like that, just so he could see what acting was like. Cause I guess that was his beef. He's like, I don't know if I'm an actor or if I want to get in it or whatever, living in LA, you kind of just know, I feel like, or
it doesn't seem like something like the people that stumble into it. It's super rare. It's like people that want to act have known they've wanted to act forever.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's actually why I love this time period as well, because it's of that mindset that you found the action movie stars in dojos and not kind of the other way around, where you get the star and you teach them, you bring in the action person to teach the star. This is just straight up, you've got the look.
And that is directly a shot at Keanu Reeves.
And it won't be the last in this episode. I can't wait to tell you this story. Yeah.
You idiot, Keanu. How nice do you feel you are? We're going to take down the prince of the internet.
Battle of the cancer survivors.
Wait, what?
Here. No, wait. He's a widower. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean,
this is stupid.
You're making him worse off and also better in every way.
Jeff Speakman survived a bout with cancer. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Because
it's not the perfect weapon. He is.
It is in the film. The name of the film is in the film.
The name of the film. It is. Yes. It's the perfect weapon.
It's the perfect weapon. So Jeff goes to this acting class, and again has this experience where he's like, oh yeah, I want this. So very strangely though, in breaking with tradition, the tradition I just mentioned of going and finding an action movie star and somebody who knows martial arts and making them an action movie star, he decides to take acting classes for 5 years without telling a soul that he knows martial arts. So he went looking for jobs. You know, he went to auditions, didn't mention the martial arts thing at all. He wanted to know he could make it as an actor first and foremost, which I think was pretty cool.
I respect the hell out of that. I mean, it's on one hand that's super cool. On the other hand, it's idiotic. You've got a skill, take advantage of the skill that you've spent 100,000 hours working on. Like it's not like oh yeah, I play guitar, but I'm never gonna tell a single soul about my guitar playing when that's all they're asking for is guitar players. It's like,
he talks about it like he's like, I knew if I went into an audition and I was just like, I know martial arts, and then did the best he could at acting, that it would brand him for the rest of his career. So he probably wasn't wrong as far as that goes either. But in any event, he did that, and at the acting studio where he was at, he would go into, he called it the video lab, whatever that means, but I guess this is probably...
Yeah. No, by the 90s, VHS was all over the place. It was crazy.
Okay. So I'm assuming this is in the 80s. He doesn't date anything real specifically, but you can kind of get it depending on who he's talking about. But he would go into this video lab, and the dude in there was a guy by the name of Glenn Bruce, I deduced through IMDb actually, who wrote on Kickboxer. And apparently... when Jeff Speakman found that out, he was like, okay, and he let it fly that he knew martial arts. So eventually Glenn Bruce was like, okay, let me see what you can do. Went down to the thing, saw him do his Kenpo, and was like, okay, yeah, 100% we're going to do a movie. Went to his buddy that wrote and directed Kickboxer, Bloodsport, and Death Warrant.
So like the three best Jean-Claude Van Damme movies.
Yep.
Death Warrant is so cool. He goes to
that's the one I know the least about.
He goes into prison, and it's a prison fight situation. It's cool.
Yeah, you don't see many Death Warrants nowadays. No, I feel like they stopped signing those.
It's just not as popular. You also don't see movies where Jean-Claude Van Damme has to fight people during a Stanley Cup playoff.
Wait, is Death Warrant a real thing? Do you think those existed?
Yes.
Were they served like search warrants? Like, did you walk up to a guy and they're like, "I've got to kill you," and they're like, "You got a warrant?" And then
okay, I guess.
Come back when you got a warrant. So
you got me on this one. I'll come back for you, Billy.
That is in an 80s movie actually somewhere though. So gets hooked up with Marc Dessal is the name of the guy who directed all those Jean-Claude Van Damme movies. And it's funny to hear him talk about this because apparently while this was happening, Bloodsport came out,
which is a cool movie.
And Speakman talks about going to see Bloodsport and saying, "Oh, this is all he can do? Well, I'm going to knock this out of the park then." Which I'm sure Van Damme, like, if he had caught wind of that, we would be here. He'd probably still be a star based on Van Damme beef alone. I feel like. Man,
I would love to see those two have fought in real life.
But he praises him as an athlete. He's like, Van Damme's a magnificent athlete, but I don't know Van Damme's history that much. Actually, I haven't got to his movies yet. Like I said, I'm going chronologically here. But apparently he's more of an athlete than he is a martial artist. I don't know, but that was Speakman's thing. Anyway, so he sees that, talks to Marc Dessal, and was like, Marc Dessal sees his stuff and is like, yep, absolutely. So signs Speakman for 4 pictures right off the bat, and says, I think to Paramount, it was Paramount, that he has this guy, and Paramount's like, okay, and buys the options from him. We'll come back to that later. And basically the Perfect Weapon is then written for Speakman from then on out. So Speakman didn't get picked up. Like the movie was made for him and by the dude that did all these Jean-Claude things. So I think that's where we're at this point. We'll come back to some of that. We've talked about how we like it and we think it's fun. I feel like I've been talking enough. So maybe, Matt, as far as the movie itself goes, what do you got, you think?
I have some things to say. Sure. I
would hope.
So,
or on any of what I've just said, also that's fine.
No, I all that like all that stuff is actually super interesting. I'm super into the finding out the history of this stuff, especially like the weirdness with, there are so many analogs to Jeff Speakman across sports and other entertainment, where this is the second coming of the greatest player or greatest actor of all time. Give him everything he wants, and then he's a major bust, or it just doesn't work out that way. And it's not, it's a bust financially, but maybe not a bust humanically. I don't know.
That's right. And you remember this from working in the video store. Like you remembered when
I remember.
I feel like
this was before I worked in the video store, but I definitely was. So, okay, here's my fun video stuff for you. By the time this movie came out, I would have been 10, 11.
Oh, right. So definitely not working in the video store. That makes sense now, actually.
But wherever we lived at this point for probably at least a year, if not more, we always lived pretty close to a video store. So my mom, because we just didn't have a lot of money, that was one of the things that we did, was we rented a lot of movies because it was relatively cheap. So she would make sure that I could go in and rent any movie I wanted, with the exception, of course, of, anything behind the beaded in the beaded room. I can't go in the beaded room, but everything else, like horror movies, action movies, whatever I wanted, it was fine.
Which I feel like was always close to the beaded room, though.
It was the horror movies always were, yeah. But I remember, like, it was one of those things where between all of the movies that I did rent, that I would read about in the various magazines that I would pick up, like Starlog and Fangoria, and sometimes they would talk about movies. Like The Perfect Weapon didn't come up in those, but it was just one of those, I had that existence where I was able to go and watch basically every movie off the rack. And I remember The Perfect Weapon coming out and it being a big deal for a bunch of action people, because they were like, this is the guy who's going to be he's going to be better than Seagal. He's better than Van Damme. He's going to be the best action movie star in the history of everything. Like, he was hyped, man. People were super stoked for Jeff Speakman.
I think it might have been Van Damme. I don't know if Seagal had hit just yet.
People were just excited to see the guy, though. Like,
they were like, this is going to be better than the guy that's going to be later. And then when he gets old, he gets kind of weird, but he's going to be better.
100%. It was like, he was like the next talked about, like, this guy was that going to be the big hit. And
what do you think? Now having seen the movie.
Well, I don't understand what happened to the guy. I'm curious what happened to him in Hollywood.
Which I take to mean, and I agree with you, that I think he totally has it and could have been that thing, right? I admit, I don't like, he could have stuck with this type of direct to video action movie thing for a really long time, I think, and been really successful with it. Kind of like, oh man, I'm blanking on the dude's name. He could have been, but I think he could have been successful here. But he also would have been, like, he comes off to me, honestly, as like the perfect guy I want to kind of see doing this kind of stuff, but in some like procedural TV show. He's like, well, yeah, I guess that could have very well been his career arc, and was for a lot of those stars. But I feel like Cynthia Rothrock was a good example of where you were going. But
sure.
I actually can't think of any male examples.
There's a guy that I am just dying right now. It's killing me. His name is Michael. Jan Michael Vincent, that's who it is.
Oh,
made his career doing like weird action movies and stuff that are like direct to video stuff. Like, he was in some big movies, but just never got over the mountain. He never quite hit the peak.
Yeah, which is, I feel like, certainly, even if I would put this above kind of those movies, it's where it ended up, for several reasons that we will get to. But I want to say, yeah, I feel like for the most part, I think Speakman does a good job in this thing. Certainly, in fact, yeah, I feel like we're trying to create a beef with Van Damme at this point now, but I think he probably is a better actor than Van Damme was, back then, certainly.
I don't think that's even a question. I mean,
okay.
Like, the reality is Van Damme was not a very good actor. He was entertaining as all hell, though. Like, he was, right. They were, I mean, same thing with Seagal. And Seagal, by the way, had been around at the same time because it was like,
was it?
Yeah, because he had at least one movie come out in '88.
He always feels like a later night. And maybe that's because I feel like I remember Under Siege, even though I never saw it from the year I graduated.
That was 92, and he had done...
What? Really?
He had done 5 movies before that, or 4 movies before that.
Dang. Okay. All right. Never mind. See, I'm not to those movies yet. I shouldn't speak on.
Also, just to point this out, listen to all these film titles and tell me... And because you can hear the exact plot of the movie, like all the way through. Above the Law...
Sure.
Hard to Kill, Marked for Death,
yep,
and Out for Justice.
Those are good. Those are all Seagal, right?
They are.
Yeah, okay. I've got a few of those lined up. I don't even remember which ones at this point. Again, check out the list.
And then he did On Deadly Ground also.
Very good.
Yeah. Anyways, back to Jeffrey Speakman.
Yeah, well, back to The Perfect Weapon, I want to say.
So the movie the movie itself is super fun. Jeff Speakman, actually, I think he's a good-looking guy. He's got charisma. I think he's a totally legit actor here. I have questions about the movie, mostly in the casting, and we kind of touched on this before, and I'm not going to get too deep into it, but you get Mako, James Hong, Seth Sakai, and Professor Toru Tanaka, none of whom are Korean, to my understanding, and yet this entire movie is based around a Korean gang war, with James Hong being one of the Korean gang leaders. And while Mako is not like necessarily claiming to be Korean, he does kind of infer that he is
I'm
Korean.
Pretty sure he does. Yeah.
At one point, which I think is just like, it's a weird thing to see for a couple of reasons. Back then I'm sure I wouldn't have thought one thing about it, but of course, as we get older and then as our world is changing, things become more apparent, representation becomes a little more, we're seeing more, calls for quality representation,
accuracy.
Things like this do make me wonder, like, I know that these guys are all kind of big names in the action world and in general, but were Mako and James Hong and Professor Toru Tanaka, were those names that were like somebody in a studio said, well, we got to have some famous Asian people in there, and there are no famous Korean people in ever, which I don't know, but it's just such a weird, like,
yeah, no,
if you're gonna have a Korean gang, have a Korean gang, have Koreans.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely
really weird
picking up on the attitude of the era. This is no surprise that
right.
It's not like so egregious. It is disappointing, and I feel like you would hope wouldn't fly nowadays, even though I'm sure it does to some extent. But yes, you kind of just take that all with the. It came out in 91, but with the 80s-ness of the entire picture, right?
I just think it's just such a funny, weird thing, right? That like, especially now we pick up on, because, like, again, it is the time, it's the zeitgeist, it's evolution. But I have to say that my favorite line in the movie begged this out of me when Speakman shows up out of nowhere to save Mako the first time, which is also really funny that there's like this group of gang members that are busting up his shop, and then one of them just gets yanked out the front window.
It's a pretty good moment. Yeah, the Korean mafia is basically extorting a business owner, that whole chestnut. Yeah.
Like, so Speakman beats these guys up, they leave, and he asks them who they were, and Mako tells them that it's some Korean gang boss, Korean gang, and Speakman looks at him and goes, I've never heard of him, and he goes, you've never been Korean. To which I, number one, laughed, and then I went, neither have you, Mako, neither have you.
Good line though, either way. And that's essentially the thing for the movie. There are some cool twists and turns. I like how simple the plot is.
Truly.
Also, I think it's maybe because of that executed on really well. Like there's no real plot holes that I can think of. There are some wonderful 80isms about it. I'll keep using that word. The casting being the most of which, and the most meta of which, but also there are some within the film I feel like that I'm just like, nowhere but at this time could that ever happen. There's two that I'll mention specifically, but you've already mentioned the fight, so I think the first fight at the very least. So I want to touch on that for maybe just a second.
Sure.
What did you think of the action?
I like it. I think a lot of it's really good. I do appreciate the Foley artists in these situations because the rapid fire, like that was one of the things that he definitely brought to the table, was the speed in which he was hitting people. And that was, to my memory anyways, was something that was like a big deal at the time, was how fast he was.
So interestingly enough, he mentions that because apparently when they got there to film, and this is the strangest thing to me, especially when I talk about what I thought of the action myself too, Jeff Speakman choreographed, with a little bit of help from Ed Parker, it sounds like, the scenes himself. He choreographed all the martial arts himself.
Oh, really? And
had final edit.
Wow. Yeah, he did an amazing job then.
And I guess one of the things he talks about is that the director, when he started to do his stuff, was like, hey, can you make your movements a little bit more, can you do a little bit more of a sweeping thing, bigger, more exaggerated movements? And Speakman was like, no. He's like, that's Kenpo, is short and swift. Like instead of a big circle, it's a small circle, and that's where a lot of the speed comes from. So apparently what you just saw and enjoyed was something that Speakman himself fought, I guess, quote unquote, to keep in the film. And I did think it pays off. Absolutely.
Yeah.
What's so strange to me, especially hearing that he had final edit, is that there are literally jump cuts in the middle of the fight. Was that jarring to you at all? Did that?
I had to assume, because there are a couple that you can really call out.
It's worst in the first fight. The second fight, I think, is the gym fight, and it's referred to as kind of the set piece of the film, a little less so. But yeah, in that first fight especially, it's like they cut, like there's lost movement, like it might, just milliseconds. He's still moving quick, don't get me wrong, but...
So I made the grand assumption that... so if you're watching and you listen to the audio too, when he talks... The ADR, I don't think it was ADR'd. I think it was what they were, or if it was, I think it was ADR'd over a different scene. Like it was they had an extended piece and they had to do a jump cut somewhere because something fell, somebody didn't fall right, something went wrong in the rest of the shot. And but they still had, because then they still had the audio with it. And it was real weird to me.
Interesting.
So I don't know, but yes, I definitely noticed there were a couple of weird edits overall in that first.
It could have been, yeah. And I actually like the style. It's just strange in an action movie, and especially when, I'm far enough along my movies that I've heard about Hong Kong action being kind of mentioned as the gold standard. And as much as I myself like the Bourne movies, it was another sea change where they introduced the shaky cam and the close up where, and by this time we've already transitioned to making the actor the martial artist instead of the other way around. But still, that they would literally cut out some of the action in the middle of the fight scenes was a little jarring at first. Cinematically speaking, enjoyable, and I think it was smart. And I'm not even saying that Speakman himself came up with that. When I said he had final edit, I'm guessing that's a situation where the actual editor, career editor or whatever, was like, hey, does this look cool? And Speakman said yes, and that was,
sure.
I'm not saying Speakman edited the thing himself, but apparently he had a lot to say. Okay, fair enough. So that was my note on the edit. Getting back to what I liked about the story, just how simple it is. I don't think there are any plot holes. I think they've used the simple story to their advantage to tell something that's, and maybe it's because I'm coming from all those Godzilla movies. I don't know, actually, but I'm perfectly happy with the amount of explanation that goes on from scene to scene. Like, I'm never confused about, like, okay, why is he here now? Like, it makes sense. He finds out about the bar, then he goes to the bar. He does the thing at the bar, finds out about another thing, and goes somewhere else. Like, it all makes sense one scene to the other, and I enjoyed that.
No, I like it. There is always something to be said about a well executed story that is just simple A, B, C, D. Like, it doesn't have to have a whole bunch of depth or crazy, insane visuals or meaning behind it. It can just be a story that somebody wants to tell. That's a fun story to watch a dude go get mad at some other people and punch them. Like, that can be fun, and that's what this is. There's no depth to these characters in terms of like, this isn't a Rambo situation where you've got it. You could really think about how deep PTSD drives.
Oh, okay. I'm like, I wondered where the deep character was going to come with the Rambo.
Rambo 1, not Rambo 2 through whatever.
Fair. Yes, gotcha.
But it's not a character piece like that. This is a set piece. This movie makes Kenpo the character, and that's the character you're most interested in watching. And Speakman does a really good job both being the vessel for Kenpo and being the charismatic lead that you need. Like, I like the guy. He's easily a dude that I can see, it's so funny because I look at him and with his, the 5 o'clock shadow and everything, I half expect him to like turn around and put on a jacket and be in Grey's Anatomy, like, and then he's like, I guess I'll have to slice this out with this here perfect weapon. And it's like a scalpel.
No, I feel like he's operating and then he turns to the guy with like, because he's never used a scalpel before and is like, hey,
oh sure,
this is actually the perfect weapon it's a scalpel, sir. It's not even, we don't refer to them as weapons. They're more instruments.
Fing!
Fair enough. Continues to operate.
And that's the end of that whole conversation. then he's arrested for doing an unauthorized surgery.
You're right. This is still an action movie we're talking about.
Because he is just Jeff Speakman and he is not a doctor.
Also true. So yes, and I don't know much actually more that we can say about the movie. Maybe in that respect, it's worth watching, and I think it delivers. Fun. It's not like, I feel like you watch some of these movies like, oh, this is going to be a good bad movie or something like that. I wouldn't even put it in that category. Like, it's a solid story told with yes, some of the silly, like I said, 80isms. Like I'll mention him now, but there's the moment where, because his brother ends up being a cop. Okay, I should go back farther than that.
Which is hilarious when they first see each other. Like, the whole moment in the police station. Jeff? Which, by the way, also, I love that the character's name is Jeff. Jeff Speakman's character's name is Jeff. There is nothing funnier to me than the name Jeff, especially when it comes to them being a master at a martial art. Kenpo master Jeff. And then it makes me think of that Jeopardy skit that somebody edited together where
Jeff Purdy. That's a good one. Look it up. No, but the story is that he grew up on the mean streets of Beverly Hills or something like that. Like, it literally takes place in LA. And when he found, karate, Kenpo, he dedicated his life to it, but he became dangerous, and his father's a policeman. And basically at some point after Jeff beats up a football player because he hit his little brother, Adam, his father's like, you're going to kill somebody someday, so get out of my house, essentially. So
he actually
leaves.
He straight up, the father straight up abdicates all responsibility to nothingness. He's like, no, I don't want to be involved.
Doesn't even talks about sending him to military school, but I don't think does. Like, just kicks him out of the house because someday he'll kill somebody.
I can't wait for this movie to get picked up in 5 more years where somebody does the eventual prequel about that period of his life. The period between when he was kicked out and the period where he becomes the perfect weapon.
So he gets kicked out of the house and they show flashbacks. Speaking of which, did you recognize who the girlfriend was? I saw her name in the credits, and then after the movie, I was like, oh, I never saw her, and then realized it was the main girl. I think some of her scenes got cut, but she's the only girl in the
that has
film.
no lines whatsoever, and just shows up at the dojo as like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm the girl that beat the crap out of you when you were a kid, and now we're in love.
She's there when he's the little kid learning, and then doesn't show up. Okay, no, she has a middle scene where she looks longingly at him when he returns to town.
Yep.
And then at the end, when he just kind of gets her, like he like everything's okay, and he walks back into the thing and into the dojo, and she's there, and she's like, you get the feeling that he got the girl, even though we never saw the girl or talked to her for the entire time.
Don't worry about it.
It's Mariska Hargitay, man. Freaking Law and Order and SVU.
I never watched Law and Order.
Oh, you would recognize her in a heartbeat, though, man. In fact, she's like her parents are something. Anyway, well, when you see her, you'll say, oh, in the middle of when I keep talking right now. He comes back into town, gets his uncle, Mako, Kim is his name. And yes, begins to defend him. I can't remember why we started on the story. It's because we were going to talk about something specific. Oh, it was his brother. Oh, and then it was the 80isms. So yes, as he's attempting to infiltrate the Korean mafia, he comes up with the plan that if he tells his brother about the guy who killed his, and I'm still skipping some stuff, strangely enough, the guy who killed Kim, because that's what ends up happening. Jeff Speakman defends him from getting his business extorted. He tells him, whoa, chill. But then by then it's too late, and the Korean mafia sends guys to kill him. So Jeff Speakman is on a revenge trip for the film. And his plan is that he tells his brother who did it, because it was done by a henchman played by, I think you mentioned his name, Professor Toru Tanaka.
That's right.
Which I think isn't his...
Professor...
actually gave him a different name as
Professor Sub-Zero.
Jeff's idea is to tell his brother that that's who killed him, and then when his brother is busy with that guy, he'll go and kill James Hong, who was the guy who ordered the hit in the first place, the Korean mob boss that ordered the hit in the first place. So, after that plan kind of comes to fruition and he does not find James Hong in the limo, but they do end up capturing Tanaka, I think still, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like taser him 3 times and punch him a bunch.
Yeah.
His brother's like, we did it. And then as he's walking away backwards, clasps his hands together. Like he's like... yeah. Like giving himself a high five, or like, that meme where the two ideas come together and he's just like, but he does it to himself as he walks away backwards. I'm like, nowhere else. Like
he doesn't have friends.
I missed, in fact, this will be the second time I mentioned this. I miss those 80isms about movies where there's no rhyme or reason. It's not even that, like when you see it, you think, oh, that must have been something that was done a lot back then. No. Like it was weird then, continues to be weird, but it's like when Cobra cuts the pizza with scissors, right? Which again, I mentioned that to you earlier.
You did. It was funny.
It's not like people did that. It was just somehow, somewhere, somebody was like, hey, Stallone, if you do this, it'll look cool, and people buy it. And it's just one of those things. That wasn't my favorite one from this movie. The other 80ism is when he's gearing up for the final fight.
Oh,
he
man.
grabs two knives, a silver one and a black one.
Yep.
And why there's two is that in the final fight in that warehouse, he throws the silver one and the guy sees it, like watches it go overhead, and he's like, oh, a silver knife. And then because he's distracted by silver knife, he throws the black knife into his leg or whatever it is.
It was okay. I want to
old gag knife trick.
I want to dissect this moment for a second, a little further too. So we're at a point where this bad guy is now above him on like a catwalk and shooting down at Speakman, and Speakman pulls out the two knives and he's got them both in like one in each hand, and he looks up and he basically stands up. The guy shoots at him. He kneels back down, and then he looks at his knives, and it's like he waves them.
The old Indiana Jones.
He like waves them, and then he switches which knife is in which hand, and then he throws them. And I was like, well, because obviously they're weighted differently. For
Oh,
This is all
obviously
makes sense. Yeah, it was a good one. That was a good one.
So there is that about it, but I don't think it takes away. Obviously, it adds, and it's amazing. It's not like where you see some of those in those movies and you're like, oh, this is a bad movie because it's also attached to like a plot hole or something else. No, it's just a funny one of those things. You get a bunch of fun performances from everybody in the cast, Cary Hiroyuki Tagawa included, which you didn't mention actually. You didn't mention Sang Soon.
I did not have. I didn't. He didn't get called out.
He was mentioned.
He is. Thank goodness.
Does a good job. Fine job. And I think that might be the last of my actual notes on the film. It's fun. Go watch it. Rufio is in it too, as you mentioned, because of course Speakman needs to team up with a young man of sort. He needs a sidekick, literally. Which, for a second, I thought when the kid looked familiar, I was like, oh, I wonder if he's the kid from Sidekicks. Like, I really feel like he might be the kid from Sidekicks, that TV show that you reminded me I knew about not too long ago.
Yeah, Ernie Reyes Jr.
Was that? Oh, that's right. And we talked about. Okay. So, but it wasn't. It was freaking Rufio. That's why he looked familiar.
Yeah.
Anyway, any final words on Speakman and The Perfect Weapon before I tell you how his career ended?
No. Tell me the IMDb hilarious trivia about how his career ended.
This does not show up on the trivia page, strangely enough. Although there was a good trivia now that you reminded me about it. I'll save that for later. No. So what happened? I mentioned that he signed that 4-picture deal with Dassault. Dassault brought it to Paramount, but this was in the time of Godfather 3.
Oh.
And Paramount was going through some issues, least of which being that the president, the dude in charge when Godfather 3 happened, was not long for this world, or at the very least the movie executive world. Which I think still isn't true. I think he went on to produce plenty of other things after he left. But
I'm sure he just wasn't the president anymore.
No, it's certainly not of Paramount. When that whole thing was happening, apparently Dassault came to Speakman and was like, okay, like he knew about it, or he wanted some CYA or whatever it was, and said, Speakman, sign with me. He called it a sidebar contract or something like that, where if Paramount backed out, he would still be on the hook with Dassault himself for his next 3 movies. And apparently Dassault had a reputation that Speakman did not appreciate, so he was like, no, I don't want to do that. But for some reason, Paramount backed Dassault, so it was like, sign this with Dassault or you're not going to make any movies. And he was like, okay. But apparently combined with that came the script for his second film. So he's like, I'm going to make The Perfect Weapon, or he had already made it. It gets a little fuzzy around here. And the script for his second film shows up, and he said he and everybody else that touched the thing was blown away. They said it was the best thing they had ever read. They started to hire up for it immediately. They started to rewrite it because it didn't have action scenes in it. So this was something that did need to be rewritten for a Jeff Speakman.
Punched up for a Jeff Speakman.
And then the president, I did look it up. It's Lucchese. For Gary Lucchese was the Paramount president that didn't survive Godfather 3 and was replaced by somebody, I couldn't find their name. But upon being replaced, Speakman says, unknowingly put this script in turnaround, which means it could be picked up by any company that wanted to. So within 24 hours, it got bought by Fox, and Speakman went to the new dude and was like, what are you doing? You're already spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to rewrite this movie for me, and you just sold the script. And he's like, whoopsie. So he went to try to get it back, but could not get it back from Fox, who eventually hired Keanu Reeves and made Speed.
Oh, no. That is a crazy story.
It is on its surface, but to hear him talk about it, he's like, it was going to be rewritten, so the bus had to stop at certain points so he could have Kenpo fights, which kind of changes the movie quite a bit. Honestly,
yeah, that's not the movie that we would have loved.
Maybe. It's probably still a good movie, but probably I'm not
fun.
Sure it survives necessarily the Speed has reached all-time classic status in my estimation. So.
Yeah, that's it. Like Speed has it's still, people still watch it today. It's still fun,
I do still watch it today. It's correct.
I may watch it today.
So regardless of any of that, I suppose I should give an amount of stars to The Perfect Weapon, which earned a perfect 5 stars.
Out of 5. It's the best movie in the world.
Oh, I'm sorry. I feel like that was a leading rating.
You let it. Nope, you let it. And
you don't need to give it 5 out of 5. I just was...
It's unfortunate. It's what happened.
Okay.
Sorry, Speakman. You've been given a perfect score for The Perfect Weapon.
Oh, yeah. We never mentioned why the name of the title was mentioned in the movie. It's because James Hong tricked Jeff Speakman into thinking that somebody else killed his friend. So he essentially sent Jeff Speakman, or Jeff, I don't even know what his last name is in the movie, Jeff Sanders, sorry, to a rival Korean gang boss as the perfect weapon, which is great.
Perfect.
So Perfect Weapon is the perfect movie. You might be wondering what we're going to do next week.
I am, and I'm looking forward to it.
I promised, I think, having the whole month slated, and I certainly fell short, but not for lack of trying. It's because I have too much, if you can imagine this, too much in my head to go through at this point. Believe
me, Halloween is a nightmare for me on a yearly basis.
Okay. All right. I feel better. Speaking of which, I don't have a good, our thing for Halloween we call Octoberween, and it's a great name. I don't have a great stupid name for action movie July. Anybody?
Yeah, we'll have to think about that.
Okay, all right. So this is what I came up with for next week's movie. I came up with a multiple choice. Are you ready? At the very least, maybe you can direct me somewhere.
Okay.
So if we want to go all the way back to those not quite wuxia epics, the King Hu stuff is, think Crouching Tiger, but from the 70s. So it is acquired maybe,
sure.
They're very serious and all that and etc. So I would say if you want to pull a movie from that, I will stick with the 36th Chamber of Shaolin. It has 2 sequels, so it kind of touched a chord. It's pretty popular.
Yeah.
If that's the era you want to pull from.
I have that one too.
Do you really? Oh, nice. The other option would be a Jackie Chan movie. I mentioned Drunken Master, how that kind of was a sea change. So that's on my list, but it doesn't need to be that Jackie Chan movie because I'm sure we can talk about plenty when it comes to any Jackie Chan movie. Or if you want to stick with this same time period, we would be, missing out on some of the where The Perfect Weapon came from. But in the year that The Perfect Weapon came out in the United States, Hong Kong was making Once Upon a Time in China.
It's a good one too.
The Jet Li movie, which I've never seen. And tempted to say between that and Once Upon a Time in China 2, which is supposedly where Donnie Yen broke out to some extent, or was the role that got him Iron Monkey after that, or however that goes, even though he's been around forever. Those are what I'm going to throw at you. So 36th Chamber, a Jackie Chan, or Once Upon a Time in China.
I'm going Jackie Chan. I have not watched old Jackie Chan in a very, very long time. I haven't watched any let me put it this way. The last Jackie Chan movie I watched was Shanghai Noon. And before that, it was The Foreigner. So, I haven't watched...
Oh, I was going to say, no, it wasn't. It was The Foreigner, but you've watched Shanghai Noon after The Foreigner, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Dang. Oh, that's the only one I hadn't a specific movie chosen for. So I will figure out what that movie is, and I will tweet it out. And anybody who wants to can email us at podcast@bookclevermovies.com to talk about it. In fact, if you want to suggest to us a Jackie Chan, that would be the place to do it as well, or on Facebook and Twitter. So that is that.
Yeah.
Stay tuned for more action explanations. Oh my gosh, have we gone an hour-ish already? Jeez, did you have any rest of the show stuff you wanted to do?
No, I need to go, actually.
Oh, fair enough.
Sorry.
Same. No, I think that works. So come back next week for any and all of the above. And thank you, as always, for being great. I'm talking to the audience and Matt Amberg.
Bye!